moment we're recording.
So just start whenever I'm ready, yes?
Yeah.
So just tell you miss one too.
Just start.
Okay. The 1960s, when black and white motion pictures were still surfacing, holds a dark and disturbing past shrouded by lies and deception. The 1960s is not what we portray it to be. It's worse. Jessica Harrington had lived through every bit of moment of the 60s. An Aboriginal woman diagnosed with depression just at 15, trapped in an asylum, released 2 years after, deprived of a voice, deprived of rights. The constant racism and discrimination had led her into a life of self-hate, sorrow, and death. The treatment of mental illnesses were inhumane. Race and sexuality determined your life, whilst basic women's rights were non-existent. Firstly, in the 60s, Australia lacked in the medicinal knowledge of mental health illnesses. Surely we would have found any alternative medication then? Wrong. Very wrong. Psychiatric institutions subjected their patients in labor-intensive activities such as gardening, woodwork, and brickwork, intended to help cure their sick illnesses. This practice was ineffective as patients remained in the institutions for long periods of time. An article about the evolution and devolution of mental health services by Lilith P. states in the 1960s, patients remained 1+ months or occasionally 1+ years, depending on the severity of their illnesses. In contradiction to this, Australia had reached a breakthrough in the treatment of mental health illnesses by introducing the first tricyclic antidepressants and the first benzodiazepines. These newly manufactured medication affected the user physically and mentally. A website about tricyclic antidepressants by Jennifer Fung found that side effects can range to blurry vision, headaches, occasionally even seizures. Mental illnesses were impossible to cure back then, leaving children stained and subdued to a life of misery. Secondly, racism and discrimination grew rampant across the streets of Australia. The Department of Native Affairs in Western Australia had directed all Aboriginal children be stripped from their homes into institutions for a high-quality education. Between the early 1950s to 1990s, approximately 20,000 kids were forced from their homes into educational institutions. Can you imagine the pain and agony the parents endured as their children were flailed across the floor? Their desperation in their voice as they're thrown into trucks. This is despicable, and we should have done something about it. In addition, homophobia grew uncontrollably in the 60s. Homophobia constricted homosexuals into depression and anxiety, denied of happiness and acceptance, as people grew disgust. In 1977, police arrested 53 people in the first gay and Mardi parade, as it was a crime to like one same sex. Alongside that, 100 arrests were issued to gay people in Victoria in a summer law enforcement campaign. Most horrifyingly, South Australian police killed a homosexual, throwing him in the Torrent River right after killing him. Imagine hearing your son's death over a telephone, unable to hear his delicate voice and his smooth touch. Could we handle the pain if we were in their shoes? Discrimination, homophobia deprived children, teenagers to a freedom and a life. Thirdly, women were subjected to sexism throughout the 1960s to the 1970s in numerous different methods. Sexism took many forms in the workplace to issuing a divorce. How would you feel if you're incapable of issuing a divorce, knowing that your husband abuses you sexually and physically? That is despicable. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission legally defined workplace sexual harassment in the 1980s, but was only recognized in the 1970s. Alongside that, Women were denied obtaining a credit card, nor a debit card, until it was under the Equal Opportunity Act in 1974. As a woman, how would you feel being deprived of these factors due to your gender? Most controversially, women were denied legal abortions. Legal abortions were denied in all states until Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade stated legal abortions were protected under the guarantee to the right of privacy. Think about it. What would you do if you were raped and conceived an unwanted child? To put in perspective, what if that was your child, your own child? Mental illnesses grew unfixable, incurable, rampant across the ever-growing nation. The relentless hate of racism, discrimination, and sexism twisted us into a life of never-ending self-hatred and self-suffering. The cuts and wounds we are left with is just a mere remembrance of the disturbing past we suffered through. We live in a brighter and greener future, and we should cherish every moment of it.
So just stop the video.
Oh.